She was too heavy to marry, so her brother gave her to a wealthy rancher. She was judged by the world for her size. At 23, Olivia was kind, intelligent, and gentle, but in her village she was seen as unmarriageable. Whispers followed her. Children laughed. Even suitors turned away. Her brother, desperate to secure the family's future, made a shocking decision. He arranged for Olivia to be sent to a wealthy, isolated rancher. Now stay with me and let's dive into the story, and don't forget to like and share the video. Morning light spilled over the small, dust-covered village of Asheville, a place where gossip traveled faster than wind, and people's worth was measured not by their hearts but by their appearances. The sound of the bakery bell echoed faintly through the narrow streets as Olivia Hartwell carried a basket of warm loaves down the lane. Her steps were careful, her shoulders slightly hunched as though she could hide from the stares that followed her. Children's laughter rang out from behind a fence. "Look, it's her," one whispered. "She eats all the bread she bakes," another snickered before running off as Olivia's eyes met theirs. She said nothing, only tightened her grip on the basket. She'd learned long ago that words couldn't change cruel hearts. But her silence hurt more than she'd ever admit. Inside their modest cottage at the edge of the village, her brother Thomas sat at the table, poring over letters from merchants and creditors. The weight of debt hung over him like a storm cloud. Their late father's land was failing, and there were few willing to trade with the Hartwells anymore. When Olivia stepped through the door, her cheeks flushed from the cold and humiliation, Thomas looked up with a practiced smile. "Another good day at the bakery?" he asked gently. She nodded, setting the basket down. "They bought the bread at least." Thomas studied her for a long moment. She was kind, patient, and worked harder than anyone he knew, yet every time a suitor came asking, their eyes would narrow, their smiles would fade, and the excuses would follow. "Too heavy," they said. "Unfit for farm work. Not what a man looks for in a wife." He had heard them all. That evening, as the fire crackled low, Thomas spoke hesitantly. "Liv," he began, using her childhood nickname, "I've had word from a man near the Ironwood Hills. A rancher, wealthy, widowed, living alone. He's looking for company. Someone steady. Kind." Olivia looked up slowly. "And you told him about me?" Thomas swallowed hard. "I did. He sent an offer, provisions, livestock, even payment for our debts. He said he'd give you a home, a life without ridicule." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hiss of the fire. Olivia's eyes welled with tears. "You're sending me away?" He looked pained. "I'm trying to give you a chance. You deserve better than this place, better than how they treat you here." Her heart twisted. She wanted to scream that she wasn't an object to be traded, that love couldn't be arranged like a business deal. But when she met her brother's eyes, tired, desperate, full of guilt, her anger softened into something else. Resignation. And maybe, deep down, a fragile thread of hope. Later that night, Olivia sat by her window, staring out at the moonlight washing over the fields she'd known all her life. The villagers' laughter, her brother's weary sighs, the echo of the bakery bell, all of it played in her mind like a song she no longer wished to hear. She whispered to herself, "Maybe out there, I can start again." And though her heart trembled with fear, a part of her, the part that still dared to dream, whispered back, "Maybe you'll finally be seen." The morning she left felt both endless and fleeting. A pale mist hung low over the valley as the horse-drawn carriage waited by the gate. Its wheels were splattered with mud from the rain the night before, and the single brown horse pawed impatiently at the ground, as if eager to be done with the journey. Olivia stood beside her brother, her hands clutching a small worn satchel, the only belonging she'd chosen to take, her mother's locket, 2 dresses, and a journal she'd never had the courage to fill. Thomas adjusted her cloak, his voice thick with guilt. "Write to me when you arrive. I'll visit when I can." She nodded, but her throat burned too tightly for words. There was so much she wanted to say, how she didn't hate him, how she understood, how she wished the world had been kinder to them both. But none of it made it past her lips. When the carriage driver called, Thomas squeezed her hand one last time. "I only ever wanted you safe, Liv." Then she climbed inside, and the world she knew began to fall away behind her wheels. The village was still half asleep as she passed through. Familiar faces peeked out from doorways, whispering, "That's her, Hartwell's sister. They say she's being sent to a rancher. Poor thing. He'll never keep her long." Each word landed like a pebble on her heart. She stared straight ahead, forcing herself not to cry. Outside the village, the road opened into wild countryside. The air grew sharper, cleaner. The sound of gossip faded behind her, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of hooves. For the first time in her life, no one was watching her. No one was laughing. No one cared. It was both terrifying and freeing. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, occasionally glanced back. "Long way to Ironwood," he said. "Fine land up there. You'll like it, I reckon." Olivia managed a faint smile. "Have you met him? The rancher? Luke Ironwood? Doesn't talk much. Keeps to himself. But he's fair. Folks say he lost his wife some years back. Keeps the ranch running with just a few hands. Not the sort to mistreat anyone." His tone was gentle, but his words stirred something uneasy in her. Why would a wealthy man living alone agree to take a woman like her, unseen, unwanted by everyone else? What did he truly want? By midday they stopped at a roadside inn, a quiet wooden building nestled among the trees. The smell of stew drifted from the kitchen, and Olivia's stomach growled in spite of her nerves. Inside, the innkeeper, an older woman with silver hair and bright, knowing eyes, greeted her warmly. "Long journey, dear? You look pale. Sit, eat." Olivia hesitated, then accepted the bowl of warm soup the woman placed before her. It was the first kindness she'd felt all day. As they spoke, the woman asked softly, "You're going somewhere new, aren't you? You've got that look, half afraid, half hoping." Olivia smiled faintly. "My brother arranged for me to stay with someone. I don't know what kind of man he is." The innkeeper studied her, eyes gentle but piercing. "Sometimes, dear, the world sends us where we're meant to discover what we've been too afraid to see in ourselves." Olivia blinked, unsure how to respond. The woman reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Remember this, your worth isn't measured by what others think you deserve. It's by how much courage you have to keep going." Those words sank deep into her heart, echoing long after she left the inn behind. As evening approached, the land changed. Hills rose like sleeping giants and the scent of pine filled the air. The road wound upward toward mountains painted in gold by the setting sun. Olivia leaned against the carriage window, watching the vastness unfold. For the first time she felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was possibility. Somewhere beyond those hills was her new life. A rancher she'd never met. A home she hadn't chosen. A chance she didn't ask for, but perhaps desperately needed. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Please let there be kindness there." The wind brushed her face as the carriage crested the hill, revealing a distant silhouette of a sprawling ranch under the fading light. Ironwood. Her new beginning, or her final mistake? Only time would tell. The sun had already begun to sink behind the western ridge by the time the carriage rolled up the long dirt road that led to Ironwood Ranch. It wasn't like the little farms near Ashevale. This land was vast, stretching out like an ocean of golden fields and fenced pastures. Strong wooden barns stood against the dying light, their roofs catching the sunset in warm amber hues. A windmill turned lazily in the distance, its groan carried by the mountain breeze. The ranch looked alive, steady, breathing, untamed. And somewhere in the middle of it stood the man who now held her future in his hands. The carriage came to a stop near a wide porch where a tall figure waited, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered coat and a dust-streaked hat pulled low over his eyes. Luke Ironwood. He didn't move as Olivia stepped down from the carriage. His posture was calm, but there was a kind of stillness about him, the kind that came from years of silence and solitude. His eyes, when they finally met hers, weren't cruel or appraising. They were curious, steady. "You're Miss Hartwell?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel under boot leather. Olivia's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Luke Ironwood. Welcome to Ironwood Ranch." He reached to take her satchel, not as a servant might, but as a man extending simple courtesy. She hesitated before allowing him to lift it from her hands. His grip was firm, steady, respectful. "I've had a room prepared," he said, turning toward the porch. "You'll find it quiet here. Supper's at sundown." That was all. No remarks about her size, no questions about her skills, no look of pity. Just calm efficiency, as though she were any other guest who'd arrived at his door. And somehow that unnerved her even more. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The main hall was simple but clean, wide planked floors, a grand stone fireplace, shelves lined with books and maps. A woman in her 40s, her sleeves rolled up and apron dusted with flour, appeared from the kitchen. "Evenin', sir. This her?" Luke gave a short nod. "Miss Hartwell, this is Clara. She keeps the house running when I'm out on the range." Clara's eyes softened as she took in Olivia's nervous expression. "You must be tired, dear. Come sit." We'll get you settled. Olivia smiled weakly, her heart thudding. The warmth in Clara's tone was the first kindness she'd felt since leaving home, but still, she couldn't shake the thought, I don't belong here. After washing up, Olivia followed the scent of roasted meat and bread to the dining table. Luke sat at the far end, his posture straight, eyes focused on his plate. Clara served them both, then disappeared quietly into the kitchen, leaving an unspoken space between them. The silence stretched. Olivia ate slowly, the crackle of the fire filling the air. She could feel Luke glance at her once or twice, not rudely but as if trying to understand her. Finally he spoke. I'm not much for talk, he said. But I believe in fairness. You'll have food, a roof and work if you want it. I don't expect more than honesty and effort. Olivia set down her fork. And what do you expect me to be, Mr. Ironwood? His gaze lifted to hers, steady, unreadable. Yourself, Miss Hartwell. That'll do. The simplicity of his answer took her breath away. Later that night, Olivia found herself in her new room, small but comfortable with a quilted bed, a desk by the window, and a lamp casting a soft glow across the wooden walls. Through the window, the land stretched endlessly beneath a sky filled with stars. She sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching her mother's locket. For the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself to breathe. There was fear, yes. Uncertainty too. But under it all, a strange sense of peace, as if the land itself whispered, You're safe here. Downstairs, she heard Luke's boots cross the floor, the faint creak of the porch door opening, and then silence. The kind of silence that felt less like emptiness and more like space to begin again. She touched the locket to her heart and whispered, Maybe this is where I start over. The wind sighed through the open window, carrying with it the scent of pine and promise. And for the first time in her life, Olivia Hartwell slept without dreaming of escape. The first morning at Ironwood Ranch dawned cold and gold. Mist clung to the valley like breath on glass, and from her window Olivia watched the early light spill across endless fields. Horses grazed lazily by the fence line. The air smelled of earth, hay and wood smoke, so different from the bakery and the clamor of the village. For a long moment she simply stood there, listening to the rhythm of the ranch, roosters crowing, distant hooves against the dirt, the faint creak of barn doors swinging open. Something inside her stirred. She'd come here as a burden, unwanted and uncertain. But maybe she didn't have to stay that way. Downstairs, Clara was already at work, kneading dough with practiced strength. Morning, dear, she said without looking up. Mr. Ironwood's out feeding the stock. You'll find him by the barn if you're looking to make yourself useful. Olivia hesitated. I don't want to be in the way. Clara chuckled softly. There's no in the way on this ranch. Only work that needs doing. You'll figure that out soon enough. Encouraged, Olivia bundled herself in a shawl and stepped outside. The air bit at her cheeks but she didn't mind. The ranch was alive. Men calling to one another, cattle stirring, the metallic clank of pails and harnesses echoing through the crisp morning. Then she saw him, Luke Ironwood, standing by a fence, sleeves rolled to the elbows, his broad hands steady as he fixed a broken latch. Morning, he said without turning, as though he'd sensed her before she spoke. Good morning, Olivia replied, her voice smaller than she intended. Clara said I might help. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. You any good with animals? I've baked bread and tended gardens. Not much beyond that. He nodded once. Then we'll start with the hens. They don't talk back much. A faint smile tugged at her lips. He led her toward the chicken coop, explaining the chores in his quiet, steady way. His words were brief but his patience surprised her. She fumbled at first, dropping feed, startling the birds, but Luke only watched, arms crossed, letting her learn. By the time the sun climbed high, Olivia's apron was covered in straw and grain, her hair coming loose from its pins. She was exhausted, and happier than she'd been in years. Over the next days, routine became her rhythm. She rose with the dawn, fed the animals, helped Clara bake and preserve, and walked the fences with Luke to learn the lay of the land. Each task came with struggle at first, but Olivia was stronger than she'd ever realized. Her arms adapted to the weight of the feed sacks, her legs to the long walks across the fields. She no longer flinched at her reflection in the wash basin. The woman looking back was still round and soft, but she was capable. Her hands were rougher now, her spirit steadier. The ranch, with all its wide silence, was shaping her, not through judgment but through purpose. One afternoon, while helping Clara hang linens by the breeze, Olivia asked quietly, "Has he always been so quiet, Mr. Ironwood?" Clara smiled faintly. Luke's a good man. But he's known loss, the kind that silences a person. His wife died 5 winters ago. Some say he buried his laughter with her. Olivia paused, watching him in the distance, tending to a restless horse with calm, deliberate hands. He seemed so self-contained, so sure, yet there was something lonely in the way he moved, as though every motion was a conversation with ghosts. That evening, as twilight deepened and the sky burned violet, Luke found Olivia by the corral, trying to coax a timid foal closer with an apple. He watched her quietly for a moment before saying, "You've got patience. Not many folks do." She smiled shyly. "He's just scared. You can't force trust. You earn it." Luke's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then he nodded slowly. "You understand more than most." They stood there in comfortable silence, the soft nickers of the horses filling the air. For the first time, Olivia didn't feel small under another's eyes. She felt seen. Days passed, and the ranch began to feel less like a cage and more like a world she belonged to. She learned to saddle a horse, to patch fences, to tend the vegetable garden by the stream. The work left her aching, but it was a good ache, the kind that made her feel alive. And every night, when she sat by her window, journal open, she wrote a single line before bed, words she'd never dared to believe before. "I am more than they said I was." The days grew shorter as autumn settled over Ironwood Ranch. The air turned crisp and heavy with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Leaves burned gold and red before drifting down into the river that curved like a ribbon through the valley. Olivia had now been there for weeks. The awkward silences that once filled her mornings were slowly replaced with a quiet understanding, unspoken rhythms between her and Luke. She'd learned where the coffee was kept, how he liked his stew salted, when to leave him alone and when to stay. He, in turn, had started to speak a little more. A soft word here. A question there. It wasn't friendship yet, not quite, but something warmer than indifference. One late afternoon, the sky darkened fast. The wind howled through the barn rafters and the first cold drops of rain fell like stones. "Storm's rolling in," Luke said, glancing toward the horizon. He moved with that same quiet urgency she'd come to recognize. No panic, just steady control. "Help Clara bring in the washing. I'll see to the horses." But before long, the sky tore open. Rain lashed against the fields, lightning flashed white over the hills, and thunder cracked so loud it shook the barn doors. Olivia ran to the stables, her dress plastered to her skin. Inside, Luke was already there, trying to calm a spooked mare. The horse reared, terrified by the storm. "Stay back," he shouted. But she didn't. She reached out, speaking softly, her voice trembling but firm. "It's all right, girl, easy now, you're safe." Her hand brushed the mare's nose and slowly, miraculously, the animal stilled. The storm still roared outside, but for a moment the barn felt calm. Luke watched her, astonished. "You've got away with her," he said quietly. Olivia was shaking, soaked through, strands of hair clinging to her face. "I just knew she was more scared than angry," she said, catching her breath. He looked at her then, really looked. Not with curiosity but with something softer. Respect. And perhaps something else too. When the worst of the storm passed, Luke lit the hearth in the main room. The glow of the fire painted the walls amber, casting long shadows that danced with the wind outside. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the fire. "You'll catch your death like that." Olivia hesitated but obeyed. Clara had long gone to bed, leaving just the two of them, the storm still murmuring beyond the windows. Luke handed her a mug of warm cider. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping her hands around it. They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire filling the room. It wasn't awkward this time. It was comfortable. Safe. Then quietly Luke said, "I was married once. A long time ago." Olivia turned to him, surprised. He hadn't spoken of his past before. "She died in the spring," he continued, staring into the flames. "Fever took her fast. I buried her under the cottonwood tree by the river. After that, I stopped letting people close. Seemed easier that way." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting slightly, restless. Olivia listened, her heart aching. "I'm sorry, Luke." He nodded once. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in how you care for things that others overlook." The words caught her off guard. No one had ever compared her to anything good. For a long time neither of them spoke. The storm softened to a whisper outside, rain tapping gently against the windows. Olivia stared at the firelight flickering in Luke's eyes, eyes that seemed tired yet kind. Then, almost without thinking, she said, "I used to believe I wasn't meant for much. People back home made sure I knew it. But out here, I don't know. I feel useful. Luke turned to her, his voice low. You are. You've done more for this place and for me than you realize. Her throat tightened. She looked away quickly, blinking against the tears that threatened. The moment stretched between them, delicate, wordless. Outside, the last rumble of thunder faded into the distance. Later that night, Olivia went to her room, but sleep didn't come easily. The sound of rain against the window lulled her thoughts back to that quiet moment by the fire. The gentleness in Luke's voice, the warmth in his gaze. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden someone had to bear. She felt like someone worth keeping. She touched the locket at her neck and whispered, "Maybe I wasn't sent here as punishment. Maybe this is where I was meant to be." And downstairs, Luke sat by the fire long after the flames had burned low, staring into the embers with a faint smile, the first he'd worn in years. The weeks after the storm passed quietly. The air turned cooler, the first hints of winter whispering through the hills. The trees around Ironwood began to shed their color, and the mornings arrived with frost that glittered like glass on the fences. Olivia had settled fully into the rhythm of ranch life. Every day began before dawn, lighting the fire, feeding the animals, tending to the vegetable garden before the ground froze. Luke worked alongside her now, not as her master or guardian but as a partner. They rarely needed words. A look, a nod, or a small smile was enough. It was a fragile piece, and it would soon be tested. That morning began like any other. The air was still, unnaturally so, the sky a pale silver that promised change. Olivia was by the barn, gathering tools, when she caught the faint smell of smoke. At first she thought it came from the chimney, but then she saw it. A thin, dark plume rising from the east field. Her heart lurched. "Luke!" she shouted, running across the yard. He appeared from behind the corral, eyes narrowing as he followed her gaze. In seconds he was sprinting toward the barn. "The dry brush caught," he barked. "Get the water barrels, now." Without hesitation, Olivia ran to the well, adrenaline surging through her veins. The wind picked up, feeding the flames as they began to spread across the outer fence. Sparks leapt from dry grass to hay, climbing fast toward the storage shed. By the time Luke returned with the horses, the fire had already grown teeth. "Stay back," one of the ranch hands shouted. "It's too close." But Olivia didn't listen. She grabbed a wet sack from the trough and ran toward the fire, coughing as smoke clawed at her throat. The world blurred in heat and chaos, orange light, crackling wood, shouts and wind. She thought of the barns, the animals, the home she'd come to love, and something fierce rose inside her. She wasn't going to lose it. Not this place. Not the one thing that had ever made her feel alive. Luke saw her and shouted, "Olivia, get back." But she was already there, slapping at the flames along the fence, hauling a bucket, dragging a frightened horse to safety. "Get him clear," she yelled over the roar. He's spooked. Luke froze for a moment, not from fear but from awe. She moved with a determination that defied the smoke and heat, her face streaked with soot, her eyes burning with purpose. Together they worked side by side, throwing water, beating back the fire until their arms ached and lungs burned. Finally, when the flames began to die and the smoke thinned, Luke caught her by the arm, pulling her away just before the weakened fence collapsed. They stumbled back, gasping, faces blackened, hair damp from sweat and smoke. The world around them was still. The fire was out. And Olivia had saved the ranch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of smoldering embers. Then Luke said softly, "You could have died in there." Olivia wiped ash from her face, her chest heaving. "I wasn't going to stand by and watch everything burn." He stared at her, his expression torn between anger and admiration. "You're reckless." "Maybe," she said, breathless. "But I'm not weak." Something shifted in his eyes, something deep and wordless. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed a strand of soot-streaked hair from her face. "No," he said. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." That night, after the ranch hands had gone to bed and the last traces of smoke drifted into the cold air, Luke found Olivia sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The stars were bright, sharp and endless over the hills. Her hands still shook, though the danger had long passed. Luke stepped quietly onto the porch. "You should be resting." She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. The fire's still in my head." He sat beside her, the wood creaking softly under his weight. For a long while they said nothing. Then Luke spoke, his voice low. "When I first agreed to take you in, I thought I was doing your brother a favor. I didn't expect." He stopped, searching for words. I didn't expect you'd change this place. Or me. Olivia turned toward him. The lamplight from the window cast a soft glow across his face, revealing a man not of pride or pity but gratitude. I didn't think I could change anything, she said quietly. Not the way people saw me. Not the way I saw myself. He met her gaze. Then maybe they never really saw you at all. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The wind hushed. The night wrapped around them like a secret. Olivia looked away, her cheeks flushed with emotion she didn't quite understand. I should go inside, she whispered. Luke nodded slowly, but as she stood, he caught her hand gently. Thank you, he said. Her voice trembled. For what? For reminding me what courage looks like. That night, when Olivia finally lay down, exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, but her heart was wide awake. All her life she'd been told she was too much, too heavy, too unworthy. But now for the first time she realized she wasn't too much for the world. The world had simply been too small for her kind of strength. And in the quiet dark of Ironwood Ranch, she whispered to herself, I'm not what they said I was. I'm who I've become. The weeks after the fire brought a new calm to Ironwood Ranch. The air was clearer, the skies bluer, and even the horses seemed gentler. Life somehow felt lighter. Olivia found herself waking before dawn, not from duty but from peace. She'd sit by the window watching the mist rise from the valley, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. The scars of the fire remained, blackened fence posts, a section of burnt pasture, but instead of reminders of destruction, they stood as symbols of survival. Olivia had stayed. She had fought. And somewhere between the smoke and the silence that followed, she had changed. A letter came one morning, sealed with her family's crest. It was from her brother Thomas. The same man who had once decided her fate without her say. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. Luke watched her from across the table but didn't interrupt. Dearest Olivia, word reached us about the fire. I was told you stood against it, that you saved the ranch. Perhaps I never understood your strength. I thought I was protecting you by sending you away, but now I see it was you who didn't need protecting at all. I hope you'll forgive me one day. Thomas. Her eyes glistened, tears falling silently onto the page. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, almost to herself, He gave me away like I was a burden. But I think now he gave me a beginning. Luke leaned back in his chair, studying her. Are you going to write him back? She nodded faintly. Yes. But not to make him feel better, to tell him I'm not the same woman he left behind. That afternoon, as they worked in the yard mending the fences, the conversation between them was different. Lighter, easier. Luke handed her a plank, their fingers brushing. You ever think about leaving? He asked quietly. She paused, hammer in hand. Leaving? He nodded. Going back to the town, to your people. You could start fresh, live the life you were meant to have. Olivia smiled, soft, knowing. This is the life I was meant to have. Luke looked at her, then really looked at her. The woman who had once arrived at his gate trembling and ashamed was gone. In her place stood someone sure, brave, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with spirit. Olivia, he began, voice low, when you came here, I didn't expect to care. I'd been alone too long. But you changed this place, you changed me. Her breath caught. Luke? He stepped closer, his voice trembling with quiet honesty. I don't want you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. I want you to stay because you choose to. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and the light of late afternoon bathed the ranch in gold. Olivia's eyes filled, not from fear but from the depth of what she finally understood. All her life, others had decided what she was worth. Her parents, the town, her brother. Even when she first arrived at Ironwood, she'd let fate choose her path. But now, for the first time, the choice was hers. She took Luke's rough hand in hers, a hand scarred by work, warmth, and quiet loyalty. I stayed after the fire because this is home, she said softly. And I'll keep staying, not because you saved me, but because I want to build something with you. Luke's eyes softened, his voice almost a whisper. Then stay, Olivia. Not as a guest. Not as a debt paid. He took a step closer, the world narrowing to the space between them. Stay as my partner. My equal. They stood there in the open yard, where once she'd felt so small, now standing tall beneath the wide sky. And when he kissed her, gently, reverently, it wasn't a storybook ending. It was the start of something real. Not rescue. Not pity. But choice. Spring came early that year. Ironwood bloomed again, and with it so did Olivia. Her laughter filled the house, her voice carried through the fields as she helped plant new grass and feed the foals. Travelers passing through still whispered sometimes about the wealthy rancher and the large woman he'd taken in. But Luke and Olivia no longer cared. They had built something that didn't need defending, a life carved from courage and gentleness, from pain and renewal. Sometimes in the evenings she'd stand on the porch as the sun went down and think about the girl she used to be, afraid, ashamed, waiting for someone to tell her she was enough. Now she knew better. She didn't need the world's approval. She had her own. And that, she realized, was the truest kind of love. "I wasn't given away," she whispered one evening, her hand resting on Luke's. "I was given a chance and I took it." A tale of courage, trust, and the quiet, unbreakable power of self-worth.